A big day for Michigan voters as we went to the polls to decide local issues and have our say as to who we want on the ballot for president in the November general election. Will it be Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden? Joining us in the studio is Leonard Fleming of the Detroit News. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So Michigan got a lot of buildup as the state, a key state, a decision maker. Are we living up to the expectations?
Oh, I'd say so. I mean, you saw all weekend we had both candidates and surrogates out for both of these folks who, quite frankly, the nation knows now. You know, Bernie won Michigan in 2016 and Joe wasn't in the race then. You know, I think his son had passed away of cancer, and so he opted out of the race, and now the Democrats have coalesced behind Biden. So at this point, Sanders is kind of like the odd man out in a way. You know, all the Democrats coalescing around Biden, thinking that he's the one who can beat Donald Trump in the fall. So we'll see where it goes. But yeah, Michigan's definitely lived up to the hype. It's a huge state.
And the candidates really had to come here. When Joe Biden said he was coming to Michigan, Bernie Sanders had to cancel all his other plans. He's got to win in Michigan.
Right. And I was surprised that most of the candidates didn't spend time here. You know, Buttigieg, Warren. I mean, Warren had her first campaign office here, yet never spent any time here.
Wasn't that amazing?
That just doesn't. It boggles the mind.
Especially since, I mean, we saw Bloomberg and we saw Trump, and that was about it.
And that was about it.
And which was kind of crazy because in November, I don't think like people are going to forget that nobody came here early on, you know? It's like, I would have thought if Michigan's going to be a key in November, I'm going to at least get there and make a bunch of noise and say, hey, I was the first one there or something like that. But we didn't see a lot of that till the last 48 hours.
Absolutely. And, you know, look, with Biden, the advantage was going to be always black voters, right? And just with South Carolina, they bailed him out basically and said, look, we think he's the guy. He stood with President Obama for 8 years. We believe in him despite some gaffes and some votes over the years, the crime bill being one of them who, you know, that sort of rubs some African Americans the wrong way. But look, he stood with President Obama all 8 years. We know him, we trust him. And that really was the selling point, and it started the just crescendo of electability all of a sudden.
I like the Detroit preacher stepping up and say, hey, don't expect us to get voters to the polls. If you want them to get off their couch and go to the polls, you come and talk to them. Don't tell us that it's really important for you to go vote. You come and tell them. Be right in front of them.
Sure. And that's been sort of Bernie Sanders' Achilles heel with African American voters. Because he hasn't really appeared with a lot of black voters. I mean, we know he has the young vote. We know he has that college age vote. We know he has, you know, the ultra liberal vote. But where has he stood behind some African Americans and really asked for their support? And so, I mean, he did get the backing from Jesse Jackson last week, which was a nice coup for him. He needed that. But I don't know if that's going to be enough for here in Michigan or in some of the other states that are voting today.
Yeah, are you surprised at all that maybe Bernie Sanders, feeling like he's behind and needs to win, didn't jump out and pick a candidate for vice president? You know, he could have tried to find a female African American that would have possibly helped him stay alive in Michigan.
You know, that's a tall order to do that so early when you haven't won the nomination and you're sort of in trouble. It's sort of
desperate.
It's since a sign of desperation.
Yeah,
I'm not sure that would have been the right call for him.
He had big crowds in Ann Arbor. But again, there's an issue with young people voting. They like to come to the rallies.
They do.
They come to the parties, but then they're too hungover to go vote.
You know, and I covered his Fox News town hall yesterday. I was there for that, and it was interesting. You know, he had the total different audience for the Fox audience, right? People who think he's a socialist and he's rabble rouser, he's crazy, whatever. So he presented himself in a different way. He didn't take shots at Hillary Clinton like he could have yesterday. He didn't take shots at Joe Biden like he could have yesterday. He really showed a gentlemanly approach. He still stood his ground on the issues, but I thought that was pretty impressive. I think Michigan and next week will be his last stand.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's dropping out. I think they're going to wait around and see what happens in Ohio and Florida,
right?
For sure,
right.
And as we've seen this roller coaster, you never really know. And and another thing, it's like this whole idea of the party has decided Joe Biden's going to win, so Joe Biden wins. I'm not sure voters like that to be told who's going to win.
They don't at all.
And so I don't know. I mean, does that fire up the base for Bernie Sanders to come out and say, well, wait, we have something to say about that?
Well, certainly the Sanders supporters are just like, hey, this isn't over. And they're right. It's not over until the voters go to the polls. And so you still got several states left to vote here, many states left.
So another interesting thing to me, and I want your take on this, is the absentee ballots. So we changed the rules in Michigan, so it's easier for people to vote absentee. And people apparently love it because they're up 95 or 97 or 92% this year. How do you see that playing out? Because if people voted early, it could be totally different. I mean, last time I was talking to you, Joe Biden was like, he was supposed to pack it up and go home, and now he's the front runner.
Although I did warn at that time that be careful because we hadn't had Super Tuesday yet or South Carolina. But I had been hearing in terms of the absentee ballots, people were spoiling their ballots to revote, and they had time to do that. So, like for example, if they voted for Warren early and then she's out of the race, should we waste our vote? So let's play this out. I mean, it'll be interesting to see.
But that's my question really is, do you think people who took the time to vote absentee will go back and say, I have a spoiled ballot, I want to redo it, I want to vote again? That's asking a lot.
That's asking a lot.
In a country where people don't really like to vote that much.
You're right. I think this year, given the Trump effect, has really motivated and galvanized a lot of people around this country, particularly in Michigan, and the attention that's been paid to the commercials, to all the candidates that have been here, to Michigan in general, to the issues that are important to Michigan. I think people are engaged a lot more than they have been. I mean, will it jump above 50%? Probably not.
Yeah.
But it could rise to 42, 45. Because voting, as we know, has been dropping every year.
Yeah, and this will not be part of the story in the next news cycle, but I'd like to go back and see how many absentee ballots there were for, say, Buttigieg or Klobuchar or Bloomberg or any of these other candidates who dropped out, because I think it's going to be crucial when you look at November, because Michigan was 10,000 vote difference. I mean, that's nothing.
That's nothing.
And so I'll bet you had 10,000 absentee ballots or more for people who aren't even running.
Aren't even running. That's
so
exactly right.
It's going to be really interesting. What do you think is going to happen now as we look towards November? Is Michigan going to be a place where we're going to see just lots of visitors? Or do you think that one side or the other will say, you know what, I don't think I have Michigan. I'm going to move on to Pennsylvania or Wisconsin?
Well, that's a very good question. If Trump obviously is the nominee, so with him, he won this state last time, and he wants to win this state this time. Ohio, I think, is definitely in his corner going into this election for sure. It's more of a reddish state now, but Michigan is up in the air. Gretchen Whitmer's the governor. Yeah. It's more of a blue state now. You have all blue office holders, state office holders. So, but I don't think Trump wants to cede Michigan yet. But Biden will spend time here too, because again, 12th largest African-American population in the country, and you have a good story to tell here. Biden has a good story to tell here.
Yeah, he doesn't want to make the mistake Hillary Clinton did and miss out on Michigan.
That's exactly
All right, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me again.
We'll be right back with more news now after this. Our next guest can give us a little perspective from outside the state of Michigan. Roshini Rajkumar is a political strategy expert based out of Minnesota, and she joins us now to talk about this election day here in Michigan and several other states. Roshini, thanks for joining us.
Michigan is definitely on the national stage, if not the world stage today, of these 7 contests, 6 states, and then, of course, the Democrats abroad. It seems like Michigan is really getting the most airtime, Kevin.
Yeah, so we know that Michigan has the most delegates to offer up today, and I suspect that's why. But it's also such an important state because it was so close last time around and so interesting last time around. Bernie Sanders won Michigan against Hillary Clinton in a big surprise. Sanders was way down before the voting started, and at the end of the day, he barely surpassed Hillary Clinton to win Michigan, which is interesting. And today, as you know, Joe Biden has a big lead, according to the polls, going in, but we have to see how that turns out.
Right. I mean, there are a lot of polls that are definitely slanting Biden's way. I'm never a big believer in polls, although there are some very credible pollsters out there putting a lot of weight toward Biden. But I don't think we can count Sanders supporters out. They are active. They are loyal. He and they are passionate, and you've got Michigan voters, and we can never completely know what they're going to do as a group. And you've got a lot of independent people. I mean, you are a Michigander yourself. Michigan voters will go out and do what they want to do, and who is resonating with them, who is being honest and straightforward with them, that is who is going to win Michigan.
What's kind of interesting to me is that prior to this week, we didn't see a lot of Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden. We saw a lot of Michael Bloomberg, and we saw a lot of Donald Trump, actually. In Michigan, in November is going to be such an important state. It was 10,000 votes in the last election that Donald Trump was able to win the state of Michigan. And we're now this week, of course, in the last couple of days, we've seen a lot of Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. Do you think the voters care that much if the candidates personally are there where they can be seen, or do you think they just kind of go by the commercials and who their friends are voting for?
I do believe they care about presence in the actual state. There were definitely some candidates when this was a bigger field who were working it. They were working it in all the different counties of the different states, Iowa, for example, New Hampshire. And that does matter. The optics of that really do matter. But now as we're getting into, they have to spread themselves among so many different states, surrogates and advocates and endorsements play a big role for these candidates too. And, in my state of Minnesota, the very fact that Amy Klobuchar endorsed Biden probably helped get him Minnesota, because I do not think it would have gone his way if she had not dropped out of the race.
So I don't think I've talked to you since Amy dropped out of the race. What is your take on that sudden event where Pete Buttigieg drops out and then Amy Klobuchar drops out and then both swing to Biden? I mean, it was something I don't remember seeing anything quite like that in politics in a 48-hour period.
Yeah, it was really crazy. Now, some people may not like what I'm going to say, but as much as Mayor Pete and Senator Klobuchar say this was their decision, I have no doubt that there were negotiations going on behind the scenes in the Democratic Party, and some sort of promise or indication made to those candidates that if they support Biden, there might be some really good things ahead for them by means of, by way of a cabinet position or other high roles in a possible Biden administration. I do not believe either of those candidates in their heart of hearts did not want to get to Super Tuesday. So that is when, a party comes together, does what it thinks it needs to do. Personally, as someone who watches this stuff, I was bummed to see those candidates drop out because I really wanted to see an actual level playing field. I wanted to see what voters in those Super Tuesday states were really thinking and which candidate they really wanted. And so I think the numbers end up being very skewed when those two candidates dropped out and you had fewer candidates on Super Tuesday. And, obviously today with 6 states and 7 contests going on, when you only really have 2 candidates. So we're not seeing what America really wants, in my opinion. And we still have a lot of the population of the United States to weigh in. So tonight will be interesting. Michigan is definitely where it's at. And I'm sure the Bernie Sanders folks are having a lot of discussions about how to play whatever it goes, whichever way it goes, how to play that.
It seemed like his campaign was on life support, and then it was almost as if a memo went out that, no, Biden's our guy, everybody else get out of the way, and then he surges ahead in the polls. I find one thing interesting, and whatever happens here in Michigan, I want to see what happens in Florida and Ohio, because I don't think either candidate's going to drop out either way. But I think voters don't like to be told what to do. I think voters like to decide for themselves what they want to do. I think they decided that happened with Donald Trump 4 years ago, and I think that could happen here with Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. I'm not sure that whichever way Michigan goes is the deciding factor at this point. What do you think?
Yeah, you really said it. It makes me very sad as an American, as someone who is such a supporter of everyone should vote. We shouldn't let the headlines sway us in any way. We shouldn't let what another state does with far fewer delegates on one hand, or just what another state does skew how we're going to vote. People should go out and vote their hearts, vote their minds, vote their pocketbooks, whoever that candidate is. And if it ends up not being the one who wins that race, it still means you voted what your heart was telling you to do. So this is what I think is such a sad part of this last week of especially television coverage, Kevin, in that, the national networks are really showing, if you really were to tally up how much Biden coverage there is, the pictures and the images of Biden, make it seem like there's this huge groundswell for Biden. The fact is, all these other candidates are telling their people to vote his way. It is not really about Biden. And that is what scares me a little bit if he does ultimately become the nominee for the Democratic Party, because it's such a loosely held together collaboration or conglomerate. It's not really all these people behind Joe Biden.
All right, Rashidi, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.
We'll be back with more news now after this. It's a story that will not go away, nor should it. A man who should have been in prison but wasn't because a law enforcement agency wanted him on the street snitching to police about who is selling drugs in the city of Detroit. He broke the rules, broke the law, but still was out on the streets. He ended up killing 6 people and then took his own life when police closed in. Joining us now is retired Assistant Detroit Police Chief Steve Dolan. This is a sad case on so many levels. Really, Mr. Brown, who took his own life, probably or most definitely should have been locked up.
He should have been, and it is sad on several levels, but I'm sure we're going to address those in a second.
Yeah. So let's talk about this. This guy has a criminal history. What should have happened?
Well, the judge put him in jail initially, gave him supervised release. It's my understanding.
What does that mean, supervisory release?
There's certain conditions you have to meet. Drug testing, which he continued to fail. Report to your probation officer, which he failed to do. He violated the terms of the supervised release, at which time the judge, because he came back to court, should have said, okay, you're going to jail. But the judge may have been exasperated because he kept giving this individual chances, and he kept saying, the heck with your chances. So the judge either got exasperated or had a moment of compassion and said, you know what, even because it's in the transcript, I know you're a dangerous felon, but, and then he released him.
So the idea is people go to prisons. Our country is full of people locked up. It's expensive. People are supposed to do some time and then get another chance. In this kind of supervisory release, they sort of say, all right, you've done some time, we're going to let you out, but you have to get a job, or you have to go to school, or you cannot drink, you can't do drugs, you can't hang out with felons, this whole list of things that they have to do in exchange for freedom.
Correct.
And probably most people are thankful to be out and follow the rules.
Most people are. Mr. Brown had a history of narcotics. He was a violent, people keep saying that he's a serial killer. He's not your prototypical serial killer. He's a dangerous felon, a violent individual who said, don't worry about me, judge, I'll do what I want. And the judge, for whatever reason, said, okay, you're out.
So at some point, police pick him up again? How do we find out that he's not following the rules? Does he not report to his supervisor on a scheduled time? Does he not take a drug test or not pass a drug test? What do we find out?
Everything. Everything you just said, he violated. So they took him in front of the judge again, and it's my understanding, based on the transcript, the U.S. attorney didn't have a chance to say, Your Honor, this person needs to be incarcerated. He just, I think it took a minute and a half, and he said, you know what? You're good to go.
So typically, at least in the cases that I've followed, and I've been in court a lot, I'll see, and it's usually motions that are filed. It's not necessarily, especially in federal court. So the judge reads the prosecutor's side or the U.S. attorney's side, and it says, this dangerous guy should be locked up. And the other side says, well, he's done this and this and this, he deserves another chance. The judge kind of weighs this on his own typically, and sometimes they'll come out and say, you know what, I'm not sure about this one. Why don't you make your case, today in front of me? But in this particular case, it was pretty quick. The judge saw something that made him want to say, look, we're gonna let you out?
So the question becomes, what, if anything, did the judge see? Because the U.S. attorney wasn't even allowed to say, Your Honor, this person keeps violating your supervised rules, and you're not imposing them.
And that's why I tend to think that someone in law enforcement said, hey, Your Honor, this guy's a snitch. He's giving us information on other cases. We have an important case that we're this close to solving. If only Mr. Brown can get out there and get us that key piece of evidence, we can lock up lots of bad guys. That's what I'd like to think anyway. What do you think?
If only I was 6 foot tall, I could hand it any model I wanted. Just because you want something doesn't necessarily... The judge, according to the transcript, there's no mention anywhere of a federal agency saying, Your Honor, please let him go. According to George Hunter, who broke the story, and who's a very good investigative reporter, as you know that, and he has great sources, a source at the district court said a federal agency said that. Matthew Snyder, who's U.S. attorney, said, I haven't found any proof of that. That being said, I don't want anyone talking.
The court public relations person at first came out and said that a law enforcement person had requested it. Now, just recently, I think in the last 24 hours, they've come out and said, we don't have any evidence that a formal request was made. So we're back to, well, we're not really back to square one, because we have the Detroit Police Department, the chief, saying, I'm not going to work with the DEA anymore in these task forces because I don't trust them, because if they're saying that to the judge, let them out, and they're saying to me they didn't, I mean, where are we at on that?
Do we have proof? The problem is you have and this is throughout the federal court system, people are political appointees. If you look at the current court makeup in Eastern District, there's this misconception everyone's like a Damon Keith. They're not. They're a political appointment by a Republican or Democratic president said, these are my beliefs, go for it. So is he a renowned jurist? No. Did he make a mistake? It appears that way. Mistake of the mind, not of the heart. If you pay him to let somebody go, and that's a mistake of the heart. If you think, I'll give this guy a second chance, but there's no proof that anyone said, please keep him out.
6 people died, and that is tragic. It is so tragic. But my concern, or another concern, is how do you prevent problems from going forward? And now I feel like there's this divide between the local police and the federal agencies.
According to what the chief said, he still wants to work with the DEA, but not on that particular task force. Years ago, when I did different task forces, we did have problems with some federal agencies. The problem is, you got to check your ego at the door. And whether it's DPD or any agency, they're the best. Just ask them. Check your ego at the door. Let's work together. It's supposed to be a common goal. So it's unfortunate, and we'll see what happens.
All right, keep an eye on it for us and come back, because this story needs to continue to be followed.
I totally agree.
All right, thank you very much. That's our show for tonight. Thanks for watching. For everyone here at News Now, I'm Kevin Dietz. Good night.